Welcome to the Intersect, the official podcast of FAbM Base. Emily and Mary here. We are so excited to bring you this very first episode of our brand new podcast. What we're going to be doing today is sharing our unique stories. It's our stories that are at the heart of our organization. It is what inspires us to do the work that we do and allows us to serve you so uniquely. So I'm excited. What about you, Emily?
I'm pretty pumped. It's nice to be able to really dig in and share our stories. I mean, we've shared the story of FAbM Base on multiple different outlets,
Yes.
but I think that, what makes our organization unique is that it is our personal fertility stories that drove us to found this organization and continues to drive everything that we do.
That's right.
So now we get to say it unedited in our own words.
Yes. And it's perfect because part of our tagline is where science and real life intersect. So again, like Emily just said, many of you have heard our stories many different ways, a lot of different times. But what we're hoping to do today is bring it to you in a different way, just to really bring in that real life aspect to life. We want you to be there with us, feeling what we felt. We want to talk about how healthcare has failed us, how people who with really good intentions trying to make us feel better have failed us, and how all of that is what has brought us together to bring you the very specific organization as we have made it. So yeah, where do you think is a good place to start?
Oh man. I mean, I think we start at the beginning. I can start with where I learned fertility awareness, which was as natural family planning and marriage prep. And, that was now it's hindsight's really annoying, it shows up when you don't need it. And then when you need it again, it kind of disappears. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I will give it this in our diocese. So NFP was part of the marriage prep program and it was required. We had, in terms of what most dioceses require, our program was extremely robust. We were taught by the couple to couple league, so symptothermal, and we had 3-hour sessions that we were required to attend as a couple. And so that, wow, you got the training. But I just remember in our marriage prep retreat, the way that NFP was discussed was just, oh, it's going to be the best thing for your marriage. And it's going to give you the most sex because you only have to abstain for 6 days and then hello honeymoon phase.
6 days is so specific, as if every woman and man is going to abstain 6 days.
Exactly. It's there was no looking, I'm talking about this with everything that I've learned since then, and I'm looking back on it with new eyes. And so there was no room for the uniqueness of each individual in that room, each individual couple, what their fertility looked like together. There was no room for struggle. It was just, this is going to be good. End of story. And so, it's going to improve your communication. It's going to give you the best marriage. And it's the piece that they left out was the way that you improve communication, the way that you get a good marriage is by working at it. And it's the work that's difficult. And it's supposed to be difficult. Mm-hmm. It's not we have basically the language that they were using, I think without realizing it, which is something that we hear, this is we hear it within the church, we hear it within secular culture. It's that as long as you're with the right person, everything will turn out fine. And it's no.
It sounds like a real whitewashing. It was just hey, do this because I promise this is good. You don't need to know why. You don't need to understand all this other stuff. It's just good. So just do what I'm telling you to do and it'll be fine. But whatever works like that.
Nothing. And so what happens is that when you fall short of the packaged ideal, the question immediately comes into your head, well, what am I doing wrong? So whenever we were abstaining for 2 weeks, because I have a 35-day cycle, and so my fertile window, which nobody told me, by the way, is based on not just my fertility, but also my husband's fertility, because men are fertile every single day,
Yeah.
unless there's a fertility issue, and that our fertile window is the combination of the two of us. Nobody used that language. So when we were abstaining for 2 weeks, I thought it was my fault.
Felt like your fault. Yeah.
It's my fault. Oh, I'm charting wrong. This was only supposed to be 6 days. Sex is a really important part of our marriage, and I'm depriving my husband, and this is going to be really bad. He's going to resent me. Like all of this stuff was just overwhelming. And so we started breaking rules because I thought that we were doing it wrong. And I thought that I was being a bad wife. And so we ended up conceiving our daughter when we were 3 months into marriage. And it was okay. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, we cannot have a baby right now. It was okay. Like it was jarring. I mean, I was embarrassed because I was like, well, here we are, one of those, what do you call somebody who uses NFP, pregnant? So I was like, well, that's us now. And great. Love that.
Yeah, but even though it was okay, and I know, everybody wants to say, it's okay. I know it's okay, but ... But to know that you don't have to have the but, and it's okay also
Yes.
that you tried to use a method, you expected it to work,
Mhm.
and you expected it to be, even with how you understood it, and that didn't happen.
Right,
So
exactly. There was no space to say both things. That I was happy about a baby, and I was also disappointed about the timing, and I was also frustrated because we had put such a huge investment into learning this method and it didn't work.
and they
And we
told you it'd be fine.
Yep. Yes. And so there was no space, there was no room, really, there was no room for error. If you make an error, well, it's not really an error because,
It's
God
God's
plans
will.
all pregnancies. Yeah, God plans all pregnancies. So therefore, you just need to accept it. And, I say this all the time now. I'm like, when God's will and yours don't align, accepting God's will, like, what is acceptance? It's the final stage of the process of grief. Like, you have to
Mm.
grieve what you wanted before you can accept what God has given you if they're not in alignment. And just this, I know now that those types of lines are just, it's a discomfort that people have with sitting in pain. We don't like sitting in pain. None of us do. None of us like sitting. I don't want to be uncomfortable. Just get away from me. Like it's very human. It's very natural. But the problem is that people who are going through this, they end up becoming isolated. And that abandonment that people can feel in their suffering is what I've learned now is one of the elements of trauma. Is that you have a sense of powerlessness, but you also have that sense of abandonment of the people that you thought were going to protect you, and or to keep you safe or, whatever. And, when we found out we were pregnant, it was like, well, you're happy. It's a baby. We're pro-life. Yes. Oh my gosh, and it was, I remember I worked in, a nonprofit world in DC, and the woman who was in charge of our pro-life office came into my office at one point, and she was asking me how I was doing. And I was like, well, you, like, thinking in my head, you work with mamas and babies and you care, like, love them both was the hashtag of the year. And I was like, with everybody else, I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing great. Cause I just didn't want to get in a conversation of like how much I hated being pregnant, how difficult it was on my body. And I just told her, I was like, I got to be honest, it's rough. And she immediately looked at me and she just goes, oh, but you're carrying new life. And I was like, yep, have a nice day. I was like, so there was just no space for me to say, yes, I am carrying new life and that's a beautiful gift, but also it's difficult and it's sacrificial. And I think that we just forget, particularly as Christians and Catholics, that suffering is not good. Like, we were not made to suffer. It's not part of our nature. Like, it was not the way that God designed us. It was not what we were intended for. And so all suffering is evil. Now, you can, different suffering can be handled in different ways, right? That when Christ came and died, it was like, now we have the ability to make suffering something greater. Now we have the ability to make suffering something salvific, but that doesn't make it any less evil. I read Father Jacques Philippe's Interior Freedom, and he said, any suffering that can be mitigated should. If you got a headache, you take Tylenol. If you have cancer, you go for chemo. I mean, that's a bit extreme, but ends of the spectrum here.
Yeah.
But it's like, if there is something wrong and you have the ability to mitigate it, you should. I was pregnant and it was difficult. I didn't have the moral ability to mitigate that. So now I need to work on stuff like working through it and entering into that. And there was just no space for that. There was no ability to do that. And
I
so
also want to add too, though, like suffering, like you're saying, everything you're saying is correct, but also because of the goodness of God, he is able to bring forth great things from our suffering. It's often when we learn, when we grow, it's like that pain of our will uniting to his, hopefully. That's a very painful process, but there's also a lot of fruit that can be born from that as well. So it's a both and
situation. It's through acknowledging suffering for what it is, because it can't bear fruit if it's not painful, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That it can't bear that type of fruit. So if you don't even have the space to say, this is good, but it hurts, that you're limiting yourself. You're kind of cutting yourself off at the knees.
And there can also be suffering without fruit. I mean, the fruit comes by a specific decision made by us to work with God towards that resurrection. But we could suffer and just, wallow in our own pain and just be miserable and hate the world, and lots of times we have to go through that to get to the point where we're ready to work towards that fruitful ending. But it's a both and.
And this is where your story has always inspired me, because you've kind of taught me that in a lot of ways, because I'm a sanguine personality. Like when I'm in pain, I'm just like, get out of here, go away. And you're like, but there's an opportunity here. And I'm like, I don't want to take it.
My melancholic self is so I go so deeply spiritual. It's so ridiculous. But there are good aspects to it too. I tell you, Emily, I learn deep spiritual lessons from my dog. Okay. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I tell you, so a dog that we used to have, his name was Snickers. And if I would accidentally step on him or accidentally, I don't know, roll over him or something, he wouldn't run away or get upset. He would always just come and just love me more. I mean, and I'm like, what can I learn from this? You'll think I'm crazy, but I'm serious. This is just to describe the heart of a melancholic.
It's a beautiful sensitivity to finding goodness and truth and beauty in every experience. And that takes a very strong heart to do that. I'm like, you know what, if somebody were to ask me what my political party is, you know what I would say? Cynical. That is my current political party.
That's fair.
It's fair, but it's easy to be a cynic. It's easy to be a cynic in a certain sense. And I can say that from personal experience. But
also, again, and this speaks to the value of our differences. And one of the many aspects this plays in to our organization, because something that you have taught me is that pain sucks.
I wouldn't think that's a lesson somebody.
No, I know it's something that but as our friendship has developed, it's something it's always been there was that one time I got really angry at God, and then I got through that. I don't feel like I've really been angry at him since, but something that I see you is just no, it sucks, period. I'm always it sucks, ... And I think that can be good. But again, it's also very important to be authentic with ourselves about. And another word for authentic is just honest. This is how this affects me. We whitewash ourselves a lot, but healing comes with being honest with ourselves.
We are great at self-deception because it helps us cope. And that a lot of times admitting, for the Ted Lasso fans out there, Dr. Sharon, SMF for everybody who gets the reference. I'm not going to say it because it's a bad word. But she said the truth will set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And
Yes.
it's okay if it does. And I think that fertility awareness has really pissed me off about a lot of things. And I know it's pissed you off too.
I was just thinking of several things that pissed me off.
We'll take it away.
Yes. Well, for me, and this is where our stories are a little bit different. It wasn't fertility awareness that pissed me off so much as the state of women's healthcare and the whitewashing of women's health symptoms that has pissed me off. How many times can we say that word in this episode?
I think we might have to put an explicit
maybe for just this
warning at the
one.
beginning of the episode now. Maybe I can say what SMF stands for, but no, I should.
Because I don't even know. Maybe you can text me.
Well, yeah. So in the episode where she's about to leave, she goes to the bar and plays a game, like one of the bar games with Ted, and her in the console, her initials are SMF. And so he tries to guess her name and she says, that's not what it stands for. It stands for sexy mother.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's why we love her.
I don't mind it. But anyway, my story starts off. I think I started my period when I was about 13 years old, but I had cramps before my first period ever. It was just this it was like this feeling, this discomfort in my lower abdomen that I would get regularly, where I would just go lay on the couch and I didn't know what was happening. It would happen regularly. And eventually when I was about 13, my period started. And then, everything started to come together for me. It's actually a little known fact that women who suffer from endometriosis can have pain before their first period starts. But again, I just went on through the years, the pain over the years. So I was just before high school, I guess, at that point. The pain got worse and the bleeding got heavier over the years. What upsets me so much is just thinking back on high school. I played volleyball, basketball, softball, I was very active. And this was something and it got much worse after high school, but it was something that affected my daily life many times that I just had to suck up. Because it was, first of all, something that we didn't even talk about. So if we can't talk about, how do I even know this is not normal? Because I'm not even really allowed to. What did you say?
You had the same thing that I had, just in a very different realm. There was no space for you.
That's right.
There was no space for you to discuss your experience.
So different, but all relevant.
Yep.
Right. And that shows you the two different ends of the spectrum here. Here you were getting pregnant right away. I don't think did you experience a lot of pain or issues with your cycle?
I did actually before I got married. And I tried to go, I was having very heavy, painful periods before I got married. And I actually did go to a couple of OBGYNs to try to figure that out. And I went to one, and she gave me 3 options. One was birth control, one was surgery, and one was like some procedure that would shut down my entire system. And then she would restart it and everything would be fine.
You sound like a car.
Right? I was like, hard pass on all 3 of those options. Because you're not really, it was just a conversation where she wasn't having a conversation with me. She was having a conversation with a wall. And I was like, bye. You're not going to treat me as a person. And you're talking about like, my reproductive organs,
right?
My future. Like, no, I'm out of here. Bye. And then I went to a Catholic doctor afterwards, and she wasn't really any better. She referred me to get a transvaginal ultrasound, which was kind of a traumatic experience.
Oh yeah.
Because nobody tells you how like painful and uncomfortable that is. And they just like the doctor and the nurse that I had in there with me, again, it was the same thing. It was like, I could have been any woman in there. They didn't ask me how I was doing. They didn't ask me if I was comfortable. They just did what they needed to do and got out. And I felt, and I'm very loath to say this, because, I don't want to diminish but I felt completely violent, like molested.
Yes.
Well,
especially as a young woman, if they're not going to prepare you for that, or even
I was not sexually active.
Mm-hmm.
So, the biggest thing that had ever been up there was a tampon. And yeah, I came out of there, like I went home and I like sobbed.
Mhm.
It was like, it was awful. So yeah, like the state of women's healthcare is just
There's a
abysmal.
lot of room to grow with that. And the thing is, the
That's a
person
very
usually
nice way
doing
to put it.
yeah.
You have a lot to learn, sweetheart.
Basically, but it's usually an ultrasound tech too. It's not usually the doctors, rarely the ones
It
doing
was
that. It's an
both.
oh, it was
Yeah.
both. Okay. Well, I've had a bunch of those. I think maybe once I had a doctor in there with me. Most of my experiences have been with ultrasound tech. Sometimes they hex me, because it's awkward, right? They're looking and that's uncomfortable, right? Especially for a young woman who has, like, this is a new situation. A
Mhm.
stranger's looking at me down there. I've been also asked for me to insert it inside of myself. Like, yeah, which was also
Yeah.
very uncomfortable because of obviously it's like, wait,
Right. It's
this doesn't feel
uncomfortable.
like something I should be doing to myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, just that's all fair. I think that is all fair again, and something to just acknowledge as it's okay if you're uncomfortable with that. Just
Yeah. And
because
most
they
women
treat
don't,
it as normal doesn't mean that you don't have permission to feel uncomfortable.
and to say something about it.
Yes.
We're not, I think that women, I know I experience this, and actually I'm unpacking it in a very deep way in therapy right now. But there is so much trauma about around women's quote unquote healthcare that our medical field just does not treat us as people, as persons. We're not treated as persons. We are not treated with dignity. We are treated as like cattle,
Mhm.
frankly.
Just
You
another
know?
number.
Yep.
And it's not across the board, but it is in large part. And that's why we
Yeah.
exist,
Yeah.
basically.
Yep.
A story I was going to tell is I think I was a sophomore in high school, and first day of the class, stood up, went to class. It was Latin class. I'll never forget it. Stood up for the Pledge of Allegiance. And the girl behind me told me I had bled through my skirt and there was like a puddle of blood on my seat.
Speaking of
First,
trauma,
first class. What did you say?
speaking of trauma.
And it's like I didn't even know like that was that serious. It was, I mean, it was embarrassing, horribly embarrassing.
Mhm.
And like I said, it was the first, I had just left home and got to school. It hadn't even been that long. And for that to happen and no one to be alerted that you're losing this much blood, it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
It is unacceptable. And I had to, of course, go to the bathroom mortified and wrap my sweater around my waist and go on with my day and just change my pad and move on to the next day.
And pretend like
And
nothing was
so,
wrong.
yeah. So, I mean, just one of the many experiences, just planning around my life because of the pain. It wasn't until I had my first gynecology appointment. I think I was 19 years old because I wasn't sexually active. Of course, I should have been there sooner considering my symptoms. But I remember going into that first doctor's appointment. First of all, like you're saying, your first gynecology appointment is enough to be scared about. Like, it's just like, what is this going to be like? You hear all your friends talking about it, but nobody talking about, how unnatural some of these symptoms are.
Yeah.
So I went into it not really having expectations. It was something that, like, again, I didn't even know, like, because I'm like, this, I feel like I'm having, this is affecting my life. So I want to share it with my doctor. And so I did. And I really didn't know if there was anything she could do about it. And literally the only thing she said to me was, what kind of birth control do you want? She didn't ask me one question. She didn't dig deep at all, which is what we're used to typically in doctors' offices. Even if we have a cold, I mean, it's like, well, what color is the mucus? Ironically, mucus coming out of your nose. I mean, when did it start? Like, I don't know. And then they run tests and they do that, but not here. And why
Yeah.
is that? We need to be able to ask those questions honestly.
Yeah.
And I remember leaving that doctor's appointment feeling so disappointed and hopeless because she just gave me because I said I didn't want the birth control. And for whatever reason, I just wasn't comfortable with it, and walked out feeling so hopeless because what she really gave me is a prescription to keep on going and dealing with this pain. No answers, no direction. And I went on with a disease, a serious disease, undiagnosed, untreated, for the next 6 years of my life.
Yeah.
which means it wreaked a lot of havoc on my fertility.
And I know that that was something that, that experience of not being seen was something that, was not just limited to your search for solutions. It was also your experience with infertility within the church. Where do you fit? Will you see me? What is my worth? I remember you like talking about all those questions, and, because we just kind of pendulum swing as Catholics away from birth control and abortion, we just presume large families mean you're not contracepting. And if you have a small family or if you have no children, well, you're just a heathen. And we never consider the numbers. 1 in 8 women are infertile, and that includes primary and secondary infertility. 1 in 4, I never get the stat right. Is it 1 in 4 pregnancies or 1 in 4?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't want to say because I'm not sure, but we know it's a lot. You're talking about
Yeah, I
miscarriages?
can't. So yeah, it's like either 1 in 4 pregnancies or 1 in 4 women experience miscarriage. And it's like, okay, so we're pro-life. What does that mean? Does it just mean that, I sympathize with the people who are like, well, you guys are just pro-birth. Because whenever you're talking about the national arguments, it does get reduced to that. Let's be honest about that. It
That's
gets
so
reduced to
true.
that. Now, when you talk about, the daily life of small town people who don't make the national news, that's when you really do get like that authentic sense of what it means to be pro-life. But that does not make an appearance in the national conversation typically. And so, it leaves a lot of people wondering, well, this is hypocritical, or saying this is hypocritical, and they're not wrong. We're all about honesty here.
It's so true. It's such an interesting point you make, Emily, because if we really were truly for both and not just pro-birth, an infertile woman wouldn't be having this experience like I am.
Right.
It's funny that it can have that effect all the way to infertility, because the focus is just have the baby, whether you're in a crisis pregnancy or not, whether you can have children or not, just have the baby. It's not necessarily a conscious message being sent by people in the church, but we've got to read between the lines.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. We have to put ourselves, we can't ever be afraid of putting ourselves in another person's shoes. And I know that that's something that you and I have experienced. Like, here I am talking to you, a woman who has longed for a child, about my experience of pain being pregnant. And we have gotten to the point where we can both make space for that without hurting each other, because we have taken that time to walk in each other's shoes. But this has taken time, and we haven't always gotten it right. Like we have, and I think that in our friendship, it's been very much a case of, we say something that's like, hey, when you said this, it kind of came across this way. And it's like, oh, and we both had the humility to stop and say, I can totally see how that came across. That wasn't what I intended, but I see that and I see you. And I'm going to try to be better about how I talk about these kinds of things. And really what it does is it gives you the ability to speak about the truth in a way that is true, that is really true, that isn't about fitting an agenda, that isn't about making people comfortable, that is, I want to seek the truth and I want to communicate it in love, like in a genuine way. Like, I don't have an agenda. Like, we talk about hormonal birth control. One of the episodes that we've recorded already, we had a woman who talked about, she was on hormonal birth control, didn't have any negative symptoms. Like, yeah, let's talk about that, because that's a thing. Hormonal birth control is absolutely symptom relief. And I know for you, like, that was something that's like always kind of awed me, is that you had this experience of just tremendous pain and you had this solution, in a sense. Like, you could have had your symptoms relieved. And, I probably would have been like, yeah, you know what, for now, I'll take it. Because
that would have been okay. That would have been okay. That's the important thing to note. This is an individual decision that I made. I had looked into birth control a lot. I spoke to a lot of different women. Just knowing my body, I didn't want to take the chance. I was honestly scared. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't know what would happen if I put that, I don't, drug, that synthetic material into my body based on
Mhm.
past experiences with different things, and just not knowing. It was enough. It was enough for me to just wait until surgery. And the good thing about that is that surgery did help me. And in my case, is endometriosis is a surgical disease. And to
Yeah.
the extent that I had it, I had some other issues too. It was not just endometriosis, it was scar tissue, eventually adenomyosis. I had fibroids, I had cysts, endometriomas, adenomyomas. So I don't want to oversimplify it. I had a lot of stuff going on. I never really stuck to a diet, just being honest. A lot of people are able to curb some of their symptoms. I really never, I stuck well enough to a diet, but I also had very severe disease that
Yeah.
wouldn't have got, a diet wouldn't have cured that. But yeah, it was just, that was a decision that I wanted to make. And I did personally, I had a lot of growth in that suffering. And I think part of that speaks to, again, my personality, just the way God has made me. It's so weird. I hated it. Like it was very terrifying to experience the depths of pain physically, but
Mhm.
it brought me so much closer to him. And I saw so much growth out of it, growth between me and my husband as well, not just with my faith, that I just saw the value in it. And again, I'm not, I want to differentiate. I wasn't asking for the pain. I was doing everything that I could to heal from it.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I made the choice that birth control was not right for me. So this was just the reality I was living in. I went to a pain management doctor. I was on narcotics. I was doing all the things in the times that I was supposed to be doing them, and I was still having this severe pain. But again, the answer for me was finding the right surgeon.
And that, see, I love what's so perfectly explained in all of that is you had fully informed consent.
Yes,
You knew what you were saying no to and what you were saying yes to.
absolutely.
That was there. And it's so interesting to me, like you describing, and it's always been fascinating to me, you describing your experience of suffering and how it brought you closer to God. My experience of suffering with fertility cut me off from God completely. I felt completely abandoned by him in my darkest space. So after we had Evelyn via C-section, which like literally within the last 3 weeks, I finally admitted that her C-section was traumatic for me. And it was something that just never made sense. It was always very confusing because objectively, the C-section was fine, and she was full
Mhm.
breech. So that was the purpose of the C-section. But I went in there, they cut me open, they pulled her out, they sewed me up, no problems, no complications. But my body and my mind processed that as trauma. And um, when I was in a space with a Creighton instructor when I was postpartum who was, could not meet me where I was in that place of needing to avoid a pregnancy, like for very serious reasons. And I didn't know at the time it was because I was deathly afraid of experiencing that trauma again. All of that fear and all of that trepidation, like now that I've gotten to this point where I can name what it was, now it's so painful right now and it's so overwhelming, but there's so much freedom here because now I can do something about it. And if only I had been given that opportunity back then to name what was going on. But I was told, you have a healthy baby, you had a beautiful C-section. And I was like, I felt like an object. I felt like it could have been any woman on that table giving birth to my daughter. I didn't feel like I gave birth. And I didn't feel like I had a right to say that because that was undermining other women's experience of C-sections. If I said I didn't feel like I gave birth, well, I'm not owning my story. And owning my story is to say that I didn't feel like I gave birth. I
That's
felt like
right.
birth was something that was done to me. That was the phrase that kept coming into my head. And so when I found out that I was pregnant with my son 2 months before my doctor said it was safe to try for a VBAC, and I collapsed on the floor in a puddle of tears, hyperventilating. Like looking back on that now, it makes sense. because it wasn't that I was sad about having another baby. It was that I knew I was going to have another C-section. I was going to relive that trauma in the most visceral sense, in the most literal sense of the words. And I did. And in the entire pregnancy, it was like impending doom. It was just getting closer and closer and closer to reliving my trauma. And at every turn, no one could see me. No one tried to meet me where I was. It was just, this is the situation you're in, and this is what you got to head into. And the experience that you had with the medical fields that was so, frankly, dehumanizing to you. I had the same experience on the opposite end of the spectrum. It was just, you're going to have a C-section because we don't want to get slapped with a lawsuit because you might get a uterine rupture. And so we're not going to inform you about the consequences of a second C-section or even a first C-section. We're not going to give you fully informed choice. And so in the aftermath of just trauma after trauma after trauma, I'm starting to unpack all of this, and I'm starting to learn about placenta previa and placenta accreta, these life-threatening conditions that happen, that your risk of these increases with multiple C-sections. And, 2 years after my son was born, I felt like I had done enough mental, physical, spiritual healing. And so, we moved into a new house. He had a steady job. And I was like, well, babe, we don't really have a good reason to not have another baby. And so right around when my son turned 2, we started trying. And, like I joked, I was like, we weren't trying to have babies and we got 2. So this is going to be super easy, and, month after month after month, negative pregnancy tests. And it was such a weird experience because in the past, when I took pregnancy tests, I was not happy about the result when they were positive. And now I was taking pregnancy tests and I was crying over the result because it was negative.
How confusing for you.
It was so confusing.
Your body and your emotions are like ping pong. I mean, that has got to be so crazy.
I had no idea how to navigate it. So I started talking, I mentioned once that, we were trying to conceive and having trouble. Like I ended up going to an integrative medicine doctor, identified underlying thyroid, like low functioning thyroid, which I actually was able to use Marquette to identify. So after we had our second, we switched to Marquette, and I thought it worked well. But now I know there was something else going on. So I had a NAPRO nurse reach out, and she asked me if I had been evaluated for an isthmusele. And when she spelled it out, I didn't even know how to say it. And I said, in my head, I was like, what the heck is an isthmusele? I'm doing like the Greek pronunciation, but, and Mary, I felt rage.
I remember.
I was like, and I knew she was just being nice. And I just felt this visceral rage. You don't know me. Why are you dropping in here and shaking up my world? And now looking back, I know that I felt so much guilt for having those C-sections.
That no one allowed you to process.
No one allowed me to process. People told me that my emotions were bad and that I needed to get over it, and that my negative emotions were harming my children. And so just, you need to get over it. You need to get over it. Not, you need to get through it, and I will help you. Nobody said that to me. I was alone. I was isolated. I was abandoned. That was the feeling of abandonment by everybody. And God bless my poor husband. I was a rage machine during my second pregnancy, and looking back, I'm like, I get that now. I needed some help. And I didn't believe that if I told anybody about my experience that I would be met where I was. And so I was like, I can't open myself up to more pain. And so I just have to figure out how to deal with this. And it wasn't until I got into therapy back in May, and I started, digging into these things. And now I'm really digging into like all of this trauma. Like I said, I just figured out like, oh, this is what's going on. Because after I found out about the isthmus seal, I did the evaluation. When I did the evaluation with the doctor after the appointment, I was like shaking and sobbing, and now I know that, when it comes to trauma, like your body keeps the score. That's the name of that book. I haven't read it yet. Probably should. My body processed it as trauma, and my body remembers it as trauma, even though my brain, my conscious mind doesn't. And so every time that place was touched, my body was like, danger, get away, get away. And it came to a head. The doctor that I'm going to pursue isthmus seal evaluation and surgery with, I'm having to transfer medical records. And I got a call from one of my old doctor's offices about like transferring medical records over. And I started hyperventilating and sobbing after I got off the phone. And I was like, okay, something is going on. Something the objective experience was one thing. It was all fine. Everything was great. You had normal, healthy pregnancies. Like the C-sections were beautiful. I'll never forget that word being used. But my body was telling me a very different story. And when I finally started tuning in and digging into that, everything started to make sense. And then I was like, okay, now I can pick this apart and heal from this, and I think one of our guests, Louise Boychuk, I don't know what number episode, she said there's so much trauma around NFP that we don't talk about. And I'm like, yep. And every woman experiences it in a different way. And I think really what it comes down to is this: we don't create space to talk about the hard stuff. And I think that is the core of our organization. Is we want there to be space to talk about the hard stuff. Whatever your hard is, it doesn't matter. We don't play the compare game either. It's not about whose hard is harder. It's no, you're going through something difficult and you need space to talk about it. We both have experienced the power of having that space.
And it's not just talking about the hard stuff, but non-judgmental listening of the hard stuff. It's very much both of those components. It's giving ourselves permission to feel exactly how we feel. One of the things I think is so sad about your story specifically is that you're surrounded by friends, family, yet you still felt so isolated. I mean, our reality is our reality, whether or not anybody wants to talk about it. That doesn't change the reality. But our ability to talk about our freedom to talk about it and be received right where we are, no matter what we're saying, that is how we heal. If not, like you said, you go carrying this weight that you're not even able to identify. Your body's remembering it, but your conscious is not. You have no idea why you're having these reactions. Why is this so hard? It seems like this shouldn't be so hard, but it makes perfect sense once you put it all together, as you have with counseling, that's why we have our external resources. By the way, one of which is counseling, which we cannot emphasize enough. I started going to counseling. I don't know if I told you this, Emily probably did, but years ago, the only reason I ever went to counseling was because of infertility. Got through the door because of that. It was so emotional. And it was after years of infertility. It was not right away, but I was like, I need to talk to somebody about this. So I did. And then I went to her on and off for years. It was not consistent. But the more I went back, the more I started talking about other things. And it really became this window into all of this other stuff that I didn't even know that I had to deal with. And it has been so fruitful. So we can't emphasize enough. Therapies for healthy people. Yes. So please, you do not have to be knocking on death's door emotionally to go to therapy. It's really helped both of us.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I've learned is, especially when I meet with women in my coaching space, I learned the power of being heard because I was heard.
Yeah.
Because I was in that non-judgmental space. And so now, like, the whole way that I coach has completely changed. Like I used to go into coaching and think like, okay, I need to have a solution. I need to have a list of resources. I need to have an answer. And people were coming to me with questions that I didn't have answers for. And I was like, ooh, this is going to be bad. They're going to walk away with nothing. And then when I entered into a space where I was heard non-judgmentally, and I experienced the freedom that comes with that and the ability to change that comes as a result of that. See, that's the strange thing, is that we think that by listening to somebody, we're affirming something wrong. And what happens is that when you listen, you give that person the freedom to work through whatever it is they need to work through. And so it completely changed the way that I do coaching. It's like, it's not about me providing a solution, because I don't know the whole story. And there's no way for me to learn the whole story in an hour or 30 minutes. But what I can do is let you know that what you're experiencing, what you're feeling, it's not good or bad. It's what you do with it. And first of all, we're going to say the thing. I had a woman once who was she was using every euphemism in the book to describe something that her husband wanted to do. And I paused her and I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, be specific. And she said it and we proceeded. I was like, it takes a lot to raise my eyebrows. And I'm usually raising my eyebrows over like some jerk thing somebody said to you, not what you're actually talking about. And she proceeded, and like the conversation changed after that, because she was like, okay, I can say what I need to say in this space. I don't have to guard this. You're not going to hate my husband. You're not going to tell me he's a bad guy because he wants this. You're going to see the point of this is, how do we grow in unity? How do we make our marriage stronger? You're not going to do that by like driving a wedge in between a husband and wife by pitting them against each other and saying, well, he's just a selfish jerk. It's like, no, there's a reason why he's asking for this. And it's important you figure out why. And we have to do that with our fertility when it gets difficult. I know you've experienced this and talked about this, and I've talked to women about this, that when you are experiencing cycle issues, it can kind of be traumatic, because you see it every day and you write it down. You write down in a way what's wrong with you. And then you come face to face with it. And it's like, yes, that's the path to healing, but also let's take a minute and just say, yeah, that sucks. That's really hard to have to come face to face with this every day.
That was a huge realization for me one day, because I took my chart into my Dr. Caldwell's office, and I was expecting things to start clearing up for whatever reason. And I'm like crying. And she had the wisdom to be like, Mary, you're expecting things to be fixed, and you're not accepting your body for what it really is telling you right now. And it was that I had that realization. It's like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. We feel like we should know this, but you're right. I was looking at what's wrong with me every single day. And that does something to us, especially over time, because we got to chart every day. I mean, with respect to like, obviously we can take breaks and stuff, but you know what I mean? Generally speaking, we're charting every day. And it was that time I knew I had the freedom, and it helped that my doctor gave me the freedom too, to take a break. Yeah. That's why I always encourage women, like, your mental health is important for me. And I thought about it. I prayed about it for a few days, and I was like, okay, now that I recognize what's going on here with my expectations, it was just a matter of me accepting myself for who I am and what my body was doing. I didn't end up needing to take the break, but it is so good to like feel that freedom of, I can stop and take a step back for a little while. That's okay. My health actually needs that.
And again, you're using that word acceptance, and that means that you have to grieve. Yeah. You have to grieve something that you wanted, which was a body that would work the way that you wanted it to, and it wasn't. And you have to, you're becoming, confronted with that. And I think that's one of the things that fertility awareness does. You had such a beautiful experience of deepening intimacy with Chris through your suffering and through your struggles. My husband and I, like, we have like deepened intimacy, but it's not been through like struggling over fertility and supporting each other. It's been through like, those long periods of abstinence. This trauma that I experienced has really like brought a lot of problems to the surface. And it's like, that's the thing, is that it brings problems to the surface. And then it's like, well, either you deal with them or it's going to be hell. And it's like, and it's so uncomfortable, but that's what fertility awareness does, is that when you come face to face with your fertility, and not just your fertility, but your spouse partner's fertility as well, like you have to reckon with that. You have to see like not just what your fertility is, but also what it's going to force you to confront. What are your expectations of sex? What are your expectations of your spouse or partner? What are your expectations of yourself? Are they realistic? Or are they based on some stereotype that has been shoved down your throat by every outlet since you were a kid? You know, like, do you think that your husband's going to come home and try to rip your clothes off? You know, I meet with so many women who are like, I have a higher libido than my husband. What's wrong with us? Nothing. You just have to readjust your expectations based on the very real, unique, and individual people that you are. Doesn't mean maybe something's wrong, but let's just start with the presumption that the stereotype is a stereotype and you don't fit it. Okay. So now what is going on? What is going on with this high libido? What is going on with this low libido? You know, and then you get curious, you know, and I think that that's such a shift that so many times when we encounter something that's difficult, we approach it with fear. Oh, this is wrong. I got to change it immediately. But that exacerbates the problem. When you approach something with curiosity, well, what is going on? What's underneath all of this? This is bringing a lot of problems to the forefront. How did we get here? Then all of a sudden you have a positive way to move forward, an honest way to move forward. Whether you're noticing issues with your fertility that's, you know, causing problems, or whether you're noticing issues with your relationships that's causing problems, that's an opportunity to get curious. And I know that most people, there isn't space for that curiosity, but, you know, I know we're not a Catholics only organization. We have, you know, non-Christian, non-Catholics listening, but like Jesus said, be like a little child. This is what he means. Children are curious. They're so curious about their world because everything's new and everything's exciting. And so if you approach your fertility with curiosity, well, that gives you the opportunity to be in awe of how you're made, not disappointed. Right? So if you approach it with fear, if you approach it with, well, this is wrong, this is bad, whatever it is, what if we started flipping that? What if we said, I'm curious about this. I wonder what's going on. And not just us, but our doctors, our family, our friends, our spouses. If we all just got curious, like what's, you know, I don't know. Like I've experienced so much freedom and so much goodness through shifting to being curious instead of being afraid, of approaching things with fear instead of approaching it with a curiosity. And I just, you know, if we do that in this space, that's how you learn. That's how you discover truth. You know, it's okay to be confused. Our friend Chris O'Neill, when I was talking to him, he was like, confusion is a prerequisite for learning. It's like when you go into algebra class and you're learning formulas, you're confused, but confusion has to exist before you discover the truth. So let's get confused.
Yeah, that's how you learn. That's how you grow. And so I love that, because that is one of the reasons FAbM Base exists. It is setting healthy expectations, accepting ourselves just as we are, not only accepting, but just seeing ourselves, being able to recognize ourselves for how we are, our relationships. If we understand this and fertility awareness and how it's all interconnected with our health, our relationships, all those things, we're all going to be much better prepared for the practice of it, to use it long term. So, and that kind of goes along into our organization. And I think what is at the heart of it and our mission.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what we've been sharing today is just, you know, yeah, our story informs what we do, but our story has taught us so much. Like we understand these things because we've experienced them. because we've wrestled with them, because we've struggled with them, because we've been through, you know, like this stuff. And it's like, well, this is bogus. There's got to be a better way. And there
Yes.
is. That's the thing. There is a better way. It's okay that this is, you know, and there's different levels of difficult and there's different levels of hard. And then I know I'm always reminded by our good friend, Christina Valenzuela, who gosh, I love that woman. But she's always like, you know, for some people, NFP is actually pretty great. I'm like, I don't know who those people are. I just on principle don't want to like them. But you're right. There are people who just like genuinely are like, this is so cool. This is amazing. This has made my life the best. And I'm like, good for you.
And there's room for you, just as you
There
are.
is room for you.
Come just as you are.
I need to sit down with these people and be like, okay, talk to me. Talk to me. What is it like? I'm so curious.
But the interesting thing is, Emily, like you are still so on board with, you understand the value of NFP, of fertility awareness, but you're being honest about it.
Yeah.
And that's why that can exist. That's why you can still use it and get through it.
Because I was lied to. I essentially, like, it was a white lie, but I was lied to. I was not given the whole truth. I was given a whitewashed version of the truth. And then when I experienced the truth, my husband and I were this close to using condoms after we found out about our second pregnancy. And the only thing that stopped us from using condoms was we are faithful Catholics. If we use contraception when we have sex, I'm going to feel super guilty. And that's just not going to be good sex. And then I'm going to be super worried because I know condom efficacy is crap. So I'm like, well, you know, I'd rather wait and have good sex than, you know, have more bad sex. So, all right, whatever, we'll do that.
But that's what got you through it. And then it was that interest that you kept learning, and you learned a lot of valuable information from that curiosity.
Yeah, but
after it sucked.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that I had to learn. Nobody told me being curious is good. I had to get curious, and I just started saying the truth. I was like, well, I'm a salty little cuss. Like, I'm gonna say NFP sucks. And people were like, thank you. And I was like, it's not just me. They were like, no. I was like, why aren't we all talking about this? Where have you all been?
And what do you always say? Be the voice that you want to hear, right?
That's right. I wanted to go back and I wanted to like beat upside the head everybody who whitewashed this to me. And I was like, you know what? That won't do a hill of beans worth of good. I'm just going to start talking.
And I'm glad you did. A lot of people are glad you did.
You know, I don't really have a problem with talking, but that's another thing that I learned from you is that there is also there's a need to talk, and there's a need to be like, all right, we gonna be saying some things, and then there's a need to be quiet with yourself, and there's a need for like contemplation, and like we have to create, you know, and that it's so funny. Like I've just, you know, excuse me while I do a little 30,000 foot stare of our episode, but get a little meta here, but you know, we're here to talk about fertility awareness, and yet we have tangented onto so many different things. And I think that that's really important to call out, because that's what fertility awareness does. It's not just learning your fertility, because your fertility doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is affected by, and it affects everything in your life. And so when you start tapping into your fertility, you start tapping into everything, every part of who you are. You learn how intimately integrated every aspect of you is, and how, you know, this experience back when you were a little kid, you know, did something to you, and now it's having an effect on you now, and it's affecting your marriage. You know, I mean, like, but that's how it works.
I love that so much. I love that you just made that connection, because fertility awareness is getting to know ourselves.
Yes.
It's getting to know ourselves. And that can mean a lot of different things. And it should mean a lot of different things, because we are complex. We are not just physical people. We are spiritual. We're emotional. We have that mental component. I mean, we are a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And we want to get to know ourselves.
Yes. And this is if we allow it, and I think that that's where this practice can become so rich, but it can also become daunting and overwhelming and exhausting, because when you start to learn, like you and I are both experiencing this right now in our personal lives, this process of self-discovery is exhausting. It is exhausting because you encounter a lot of painful things. And the thing is that once you're aware, you can't ever be unaware. You can't ever shut it off. Like I know I joke with people, like I use Marquette now, but I've used Creighton. I still track my mucus. I can't ever shut that off. I'm aware of it. It's there. Like I cannot shut that part of my brain off. And I'm like, oh, I really wish I could some days. I really wish I could. But it's worth it, because you see the benefits. Like I see the benefits in my relationships with my husband, with my kids, with my family, with my friends. Things change, and change is difficult. Change is hard. We don't like change. Change sucks, but it's good. It's good.
Well,
And
and
it's part of living. It's just, you got to make space for it. That's it.
that self-awareness that you're talking about, and what I was talking about getting to know myself or getting to know yourself, that was a huge part of my healing with infertility. It was getting to know myself and how God designed me as a person, and my gifts and my talents, and like really exploring who I'm meant to be as a person. I mean, that was the single most important thing that led to my freedom. It doesn't mean I don't still have that pain, but that's why I'm always talking about like, what has God created you to do? Because we can get so distracted by those other things. But getting to know myself, in my case, it was infertility. But getting to know yourself is going to look 1,000 different ways. There's so many different unique people in the world. But for me, that it has led me to healing in different ways.
Yeah, that you've found what your worth lies in, and that your worth is not defined by your fertility.
Yeah.
That your worth is defined by who you are.
Yeah.
And what a profoundly beautiful thing to be curious about. Who am I?
Right?
But it's also a horrifying question. It's like, who am I? Like
Horrifying and freeing at the same time.
so much. Yeah. So much of what we said today can be defined as horrifying and freeing.
Totally.
But no, it's like, I know you've had so many different interests, and I'm always like intrigued when I find out something new about you. Like when I found out you were a rapper, I was like, excuse me, what? Like what is this? But yeah, it's like you learn that there is a goodness in you that is just intrinsic to who you are, and it's not defined by what you produce, whether children or otherwise.
That's right.
Yeah, I know. Write that down. Put it on a bumper sticker.
Heck yeah, I'll buy that bumper sticker.
I know. Yeah, it's overwhelming and freeing,
Yes.
but it's good. It's good. It's our life's work, right?
Right.
That's our life's work, is to figure out who we are and then be it, not do it, be it.
That's right. I love this conversation. I love chatting with you. That's why I love that we're starting a podcast. And just so you guys know, to give you a taste of what we envision for this podcast, today was a little bit longer of an episode. We wanted you guys to get to know us and what the heart of our goals and our missions are as FAbM Base, as Emily and Mary. And but it's not just going to be this. So we're going to have some conversations with Emily and I alone, where we tackle all kinds of different topics. But we also really have a lot of interviews. And in those interviews, we have just real women living out this practice. We have physicians, we have professionals. I mean, we're going to have a wide range, or a wide variety of people, and men too, priests, just husbands.
Oh, we got a priest on here.
We got a priest on. We can't wait to bring you that episode. So we definitely, again, this is user driven. So please let us know the type of content, the type of people that you want us to interview. But you're going to get both, and you're going to get the science, and you're going to get the real life. So, and that's what we're so excited to be able to bring you in our own unique way. We know you have a lot of options, and that's a good thing. A lot of options when it comes to fertility awareness, and people doing an amazing job spreading that message. And this is just how we choose to do it. And it's very much us.
Yeah. And I hope you've kind of gotten a taste that, we know we're trying to appeal to a very wide audience and that we're not going to appeal to everybody all the time. We're cool with that. But you know, I hope that we've communicated that like we are curious. Like we want to know what's hitting you when you listen to our podcast, when you go to our website. Oh man, I really wish you had this on there. Email us, tell us, you know, drop a note down. Can you do that on like our podcast notes?
I don't think so.
Full disclosure, guys, I don't listen to many podcasts, and here I am starting one. So,
And that's okay.
Is this hypocritical? Anyway, yeah, shoot us an email, find us on social media, and like send us a message. Like, you know, it's just the two of us, so responses may be slow, but send us a note. We want to hear from you, because what you've heard in our story is how, you know, a lot of it is, if somebody just saw me, if somebody just listened to me, that would have made all the difference in the world. And so we know the power of that. We may not be able to find the solution that you want, but just, we can see you. Like we can take a minute and be like, I see you. It costs us nothing. And so don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, if you're wondering where to find our website, it's FAbMBase.org. Like Emily said, you can contact us there, and you can also find us on social media. But we are so glad to have you here with us today. We really enjoyed talking to each other and sharing all that we have learned and experienced with you. And we hope to see you next time. Y'all take care.